Hello, truth seekers. Are you ready to unlock a world of uncensored, unbiased truth? For a limited time, we're offering an exclusive 7-day trial of VERITAS Plus for just $9.99. Imagine having a secret key to a treasure trove of knowledge. With VERITAS Plus, you'll gain full access to our captivating programs, insider news, an exclusive quantum search engine, our extensive VERITAS library, VERITAS TV, and so much more. It's a journey into the unknown, an adventure in discovery. But don't just take our word for it. Experience it for yourself. Dive deep into the mysteries of the universe and the hidden truths of our world. Ready to join our community of truth seekers? Start your 7-day trial now. Unveil the truth and embark on a journey like no other. Don't let this limited time opportunity slip away. Sign up for VERITAS Plus today and take the first step towards enlightenment. Embark on a journey of discovery, unlock secrets, and be a part of something extraordinary. VERITAS Plus. Your key to the truth is just a click away. Sign up for VERITAS Plus today.
The questions you always had. The answers you were never given. The place to seek the truth. Welcome to VERITAS.
Tonight, we welcome back a familiar voice by popular demand. A voice that echoes through the hallways of alternative knowledge. A beacon of independent inquiry. Who revels in navigating the labyrinth of life's greatest mysteries. I'm referring to the indomitable Mike Wilkerson. From his early adventures in the 80s as a maverick hacker, daringly infiltrating the servers of giants such as Microsoft, to a transformative journey leading him to the sun-kissed shores of Costa Blanca, Spain. As a devoted chiropractor, Mike's life is a testament of resilience and a ceaseless quest for knowledge. His days of digital intrigue may have ended with a brief incarceration, but his spirit of defiance and thirst for understanding the unexplored never waned. Instead, he transformed and matured, leading him to question the unquestionables and dig beneath the surface of our reality. For the last decade and more, Mike has been instrumental in improving the world's health one spine at a time, channeling his energy into the well-being of others. But this benevolent backcracker is not just about the physical. A father of two, an avid hiker, an ardent health crusader, an artist, a budding author, and a dedicated mapper of cognitive rabbit holes, Mike embodies a holistic approach to life and understanding. Mike's investigative lens, however, doesn't stop at the human body. He has carved out a niche for himself in the world of alternative research, plumbing the depths of biogeology and titanology. His focus primarily orbits around alternative history, non-standard cosmologies, gigantism, and rapid petrification, challenging the paradigm and shedding light on aspects of our world that often go unnoticed. From exploring the mysteries of the great trees to pondering the perplexities of geopolymers and melted structures, from waking up with Analog, the archivist, to examining the nuances of truth or discernment, Mike leaves no stone unturned. His work on petrified titans and organs is a testament to his dedication and his keen interest in the heart structure and function. So if you want to explore the uncharted territories of our reality, don't go anywhere.
Welcome to VERITAS. If this is your first time listening, welcome home. To access tonight's full interview and all of our exclusive material, simply join the VERITAS Plus family by clicking on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. And while you're there, don't forget to check out the VERITAS store for a range of great products, including focused life force energy. Experience the power of FLFE with a 15-day free trial today. No credit card required. We're excited to announce the launch of our brand new VERITAS Plus Insider, your source for exclusive news and insights you won't find anywhere else. If you're looking to get in touch with Mel, have a guest suggestion, or would like to provide feedback, simply click on the contact button on our website. So sit back, relax, and enjoy tonight's show. And now, here's your host, Mel Hostelrick.
And his YouTube channel is Stellium7. Directly from Costa Blanca, Spain, I'd like to welcome Mike Wilkerson. Hello, Mike, and welcome back. How are you?
Hi, Mel. I'm really good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be invited back. It was a lot of fun last time.
Absolutely. And you had a lot of people saying, bring him back. There's a lot of stuff that we need to talk about again. But I was mentioning to you offline, I'd like to start with this. I know this is not your area of expertise, but we have a mutual friend, Alex Michael, the conspiracy music guru, who lives close to you. He was with me on the show last week, and he said a few things, and for some reason I didn't probe too much. But I'd like to get your take on this, and maybe you have some references. But he mentioned a few things about, instead of focusing so much on the South Pole, or some people call it the ring around what we call the plane, the ice walls, he says, I like to focus more on the North Pole, because you have Scandinavia there, for example, with Sweden. He said, S.W. Eden, Southwest Eden, Norway, the way of the North, Finland, Finn means in Latin, the end of land, and Denmark, the mark of Eden. So that prompted me to ask you, do you know anything about this?
A bit. I've seen a lot of videos covering these topics, and I heard an audiobook called The Smoky God, which tells the story of a fisherman and his son, I believe, who were leaving from Norway and found a passage kind of by accident to these northern lands that we see on a lot of different older maps. There's often you'll find it's a 4-continent system that it's shaped kind of like a pie with 4 rivers going in and out. And this is where our mythic tales of Hyperborea and the world tree of the Norse mythologies, Yggdrasil, it all centers around these areas, and I think it's incredibly fascinating. That's where we have the northern lights up there. Our compasses point there. Come past seems to kind of say something in the word like come. I don't know. I'm far more drawn to the northern pole than the southern pole, based on what I know about who likes to go to the south. And before we started, we were talking a little bit about the Bach saga, which I'm no expert on, but I've watched some documentaries on that as well. And that's a fascinating story of it's told by a man named Eeyore Bach, who's no longer alive, but he claimed to be the final descendant of a family that traced their lineage back to the first people who originated from these central lands in Hyperborea. And he was Finnish, and he claims that when the last major cataclysm occurred, that because of the Gulf Stream that winds its way from the Gulf of Mexico around Florida and up into it's called Östersjön, which is the Eastern Sea, which is the sea that goes up past Gotland and then right up into Finland, and that these were the only sections of the world that were inhabitable above ground during that time. So he's got a very, very interesting story to tell. It was an oral tradition that was passed down to him by his mother and sister, and I can definitely recommend people look into that.
Do you think there's a symbolic or literal significance to these Scandinavian countries, the names, in terms of their geographical positioning?
I definitely think there could be. I mean, when you look at these old maps, it seems like things have gone missing in our current maps. And when you look on Google Earth, which I like to do a lot, the North Pole is just showing water. And I don't know about you, when I was a kid, I remember that was all ice up there. Nice. And there were people who trekked to the North Pole, and now when you look on Google Earth, it's all just a bunch of water. And if you zoom in close, there's all kinds of little anomalies that you can see on Google Earth, and it looks like a big pie. It's like, it looks a lot like they kind of wrapped a flat surface around a ball, and then they had problems with rendering. And so you can see the artifacts of that. The same when you go to look at the South Pole, looks like a Pac-Man with these little wedges, and you zoom in close on what should be the South Pole. And you're not seeing reality there. You're just seeing some glitch of the matrix.
Well, Google is part of the deep state. I mean, we know that whatever we see, and even Alex was mentioning that he was discussing an area somewhere. I forgot exactly where it was, and not even a week later, Google completely pixelated it so that people can't see that part anymore. So they're on the lookout for people like you, Alex, and me, I guess.
That happens all the time. Stuff goes missing on Google Earth. It's pretty interesting. And I'm sure they'd explain it all away with some kind of rendering error or something, you know, but, as we spoke about in our last, conversation with regards to the research that I did on the mountain Mont Go, after I'd done 3 or 4 videos on that subject, a certain eye and ear went missing from Google Earth.
That's what Alex was saying. Now I remember, that's exactly what he said of your research, that you were looking into the cavity of the eye and then all of a sudden Google Earth blocked that. Why would they do that? Why?
They didn't block it entirely. I think they couldn't block it entirely because this is a very tourist region and a lot of hikers go up to this mountain. And so, you know, it's when it's rendered in 3D, it has very high level of detail. And so after I made the 3rd and 4th videos covering the eye, or the 2nd and 3rd covering the eye and the ear, I was in an interview with a friend and was showing him. And as I went to zoom in on this area, just the eye and just the ear were blurred out. Now other parts of the mountain have also been blurred out, so it's not as suspicious. But back then it was just the eye and the ear. But I had used Google Earth and zoomed in a very slow fashion, high definition, and I was able to use that almost like as if I had drone footage. So I was flying in from very far away and zooming in on the mountain from a variety of different angles, and so I had all that footage. And then after it changed, I was able to show the before and after, and that's what I did in the 5th video. It's a series called Unveiling a Titan. There's 6 parts to it, plus a 7th part that was that I filmed live up at the eye with questions and answers, and went around and showed some of these different features that seem to match up perfectly with eye socket anatomy, which is pretty odd if it was just pareidolia or some, you know, trick of the mind.
We're going to get back to biogeology in a moment, especially that mountain in where you are. But I'm thinking of one image that I saw. This is in Southeast Asia, I believe. I'm sure you have seen it. And it's this gigantic snake. And it goes around a mountain, and you see the actual texture of the snake.
Scales.
And then the scales. And then you see the actual head of the snake. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's called the Naga, Naga. And I think the local myths tell the tale of some woman who was a sorceress or something and was very upset. And I can't remember if she became petrified, or I don't remember the details of the story, but it's worth looking into because it's an interesting read. And there's a lot of good footage that you can find on YouTube of people walking around this. And I don't know if this is something that was carved over a very, very long period of time by people that wanted to make it look that way, or if it just is what it appears to be, but it sure looks like a Titan snake. We're talking huge, you know, hundreds of feet, in length and coiling. And like you said, there's a very detailed head and all the scales are there, and it just curves exactly as if a snake would curve. So it's fascinating to look at. It's definitely one of the better Titan examples out there.
If it's a petrified animal, again, you may have discussed this during our last interview, what could create this effect? Because it seems that the animals, they seem alive but petrified.
Right. Yeah. So we're talking about really petrification that's rapid, not something that's occurring over hundreds or thousands or millions of years, because obviously if it's flesh, it would start to degenerate. It would decay. It would be eaten by larvae and bacteria. So the fact that some of these finds are so well preserved suggests that whatever happened very, very quickly. So that gets into this topic of instant petrification, which I've been fascinated with now for, going on 4 years, ever since I started to look at the mountain. And obviously there's a lot of different possible explanations for how something like that could happen. I mean, you have the biblical explanations, you have the mythological explanations. From a scientific perspective, we're looking at it, you know, from very left brain and, you know, what can we look at in the here and now to prove or disprove this? I've been more interested in other kinds of explanations that have to do with things like, you know, volcanic activity, plasma. You know, there's a lot of different things you can look at, but those are some of the best explanations for, as far as I'm concerned.
Going back to biogeology, any new insights that have surfaced since we last talked about this?
Yeah, well, I've been looking into it a lot. I wouldn't say that I personally have made more discoveries as far as what's, you know, here around me. You know, we discussed the heart stones quite a bit last time, the research that I did into these rocks that I began to notice that had a reoccurring pattern that didn't make any sense based on random erosion or bumping around against other rocks or water erosion, because they were very, very specific and they were matching heart anatomy. And we're told that's totally impossible because hearts don't petrify. You get petrified bones and that sort of thing. But, soft tissue is said to be eaten long before it could ever petrify. So it's been an odd thing because I've been kind of working backwards, with all of this. I don't come from a geology background. I don't have a chemistry background or, you know, any of these subjects. I've been looking at things with different eyes after seeing some fascinating theories and then noticed different patterns. And then as I started to look into those patterns more and more, I found that, wait a minute, there's way too much that's just lining up with what initially seemed random chance. And then it doesn't make sense as random chance anymore. So I've been trying to come up with the theories after the fact instead of having a theory first and looking for ways of proving it. It's, it's been an interesting journey in that respect. So I've been a bit reluctant. You know, I've had a lot of self-doubt because I don't have expertise in any of these disciplines. So like, who am I to be taking on a whole ology with these findings and trying to present something that most of the world would consider to be absolutely absurd?
Is there any type of laboratory that could take any of the, for example, the hearts, the petrified hearts that you have? Any laboratory that could undertake this?
Yeah, some people reached out to me, 2 or 3 years ago, who one of them was friends with somebody who owned a laboratory that had, you know, the machinery that would be necessary to really do an in-depth investigation with these stones. What I was most interested in was spectroscopy, because that can give you the actual breakdown of what the structure is made of. So if you have a rock and you pulverize it, you hit it with, you know, a spectroscopy machine that's gonna hit it with light, and then you can see it reflects back based on what the elements are, and you can determine what the elements are in the sample and what percentages are there. And I thought that's a perfect way to do a comparison with what we know about hearts, for example. I wouldn't expect there to be a direct correlation, obviously, because one is flesh and one is stone. So to me, that necessitates that there's been some sort of a transmutation that's occurred, and the elements have literally gone from one thing to another. And one of those discoveries that I made along the way, which I didn't know about until I was trying to understand the phenomenon better, is that there are different examples that we can point to of examples of things where biology can transmute. So there's actual transmutation of elements that occurs in biology. And I gave, I think, the example last time of an egg that a chicken is eating its food, and then every single day it's producing an egg, and it lays this egg that has a shell that's made almost entirely of calcium. Well, they've done experiments where they've looked at the intake of the chicken and tried to determine how much calcium is in the chicken's diet. And they found out that there's more calcium in the eggshell than the chicken is consuming each day. So that's, beyond what the chicken might need for its own calcium needs. It's producing these eggs, on a daily basis. So right off the bat, you've got an example there of the chicken is taking in something that is then being transmuted into calcium. And there are other examples of people that have done studies with trees, for example, where they take a tree and they put it in a pot and they weigh the soil in the tree, and then they put it inside of a room, so it's only getting sunlight through the windows and it's only getting distilled water. And then over the course of several years, this tree grows and it takes on mass. Well, where's it getting that from? It's transmuting light and water and creating material in the tree. So, these are just fascinating ideas that I came across before, because I wasn't aware of this, because the mainstream model when it comes to elements and, how elements are born in the heart of stars and the supernovas spread them out into the universe, that requires something like, nuclear fusion in order to create new elements. So I no longer believe the mainstream model when it comes to a lot of things that have to do with physics and the age of things and how certain materials come about.
When you take one of those hearts and you pulverize it, for example, and, you mix it with water, I'm not a biologist or a scientist, I'm just thinking out loud. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you be able to detect some of the composition of blood from iron, the muscles, and so on?
Exactly. That's what I had hoped we would be doing when I sent these samples off to this laboratory. I've got 2 videos on my channel that cover that. The first one is called An Exciting Research Day, where I took a dozen of these stones and I actually filmed them just before sending them off in a box, and I show them and rotate them, giving a 360-degree view of each stone. And I talked about why I chose those particular stones and how they were matching this pattern that I'd recognized. And, so I sent those off, and it took about a month or so before I started to get answers back. And it was very interesting. We discussed this briefly last time, but there's a second video on my channel. It's called Paradigm Crushed. And it's a very long video, but it's very interesting because the first 90 minutes of this video are the telephone conversations between myself and the man who initially reached out to me. He asked me up front if he could record the call, which caught me off guard a little bit, but I had nothing to hide. And I was happy that somebody was interested in taking the research further, because, it's just me here. I don't have a budget and I'm not an expert in these subjects. So, it was exciting to me that somebody was reaching out that had access to a laboratory and was interested in doing a free analysis on these stones. And they offered to pay me, but I wasn't looking for compensation. I just wanted the data. I wanted to see, what do the numbers say? And I already knew that the chances were that whatever came back was going to be different from what you would expect in the composition of a fleshy heart. But I have a friend has a PhD in molecular chemistry, so I knew that I could get an objective pair of eyes looking at this, to see if maybe there was a correlation where certain elements lined up and other ones didn't. And that in combination with all of the different findings that I've already documented extensively on my channel with these stones, I've probably got 20 videos or more, covering these and hundreds and hundreds of examples of them. I figured that combined with spectroscopy, if there was a pretty good correlation, from a percentage perspective, that it would be a real slam dunk for evidence in favor of this theory. But unfortunately, I got a couple of guys who were interested in defending the mainstream theory, not interested in doing any actual analysis of the stones. They provided me no data. I got no numbers. I got basically a hand-wave dismissal of the theory. And then fortunately, the two of them had a conversation, which was also recorded, in which they discussed the findings and the results and talked about all the different ways in which I had gone wrong with my thinking. And, so I thought that was a pretty fascinating, chain of events. And I went through every line of those conversations and address what they were talking about and present visuals for what they're claiming, and then show that in contrast to my stones and what I had sent to them. And it's pretty telling, I think. It's well worth the watch. Paradigm Crushed. It's on my channel.
After listening to what you just said about academia getting involved and protecting the narrative that they impose upon us, do you think that it's time for us to have alternative academia or independent or non-traditional academia to counteract the perceived limitations or shortcomings that mainstream academia pushes upon us all the time?
Yeah, I do, but how to go about, bringing something like that about. I don't know. My take on things now is so much of academia is there for the purposes of, narrative control and keeping us off the scent of the truth when it comes to a whole wide variety of topics. You have this whole concept of peer review, which in and of itself is a logical fallacy if you think about it, because what is peer review? It's just an appeal to authority. So people within a particular discipline are talking amongst themselves to decide whether this new information that's coming in is worthy of being published or not. So if there's a narrative that's coming in and evidence in favor of that narrative, and that narrative is completely going against whatever the mainstream accepted beliefs are on a particular topic, what chance does that have of coming through? You have a lot of people with vested interest, financially vested interests when it comes to their education and their, the letters after their name. So I think a lot of the most important knowledge is actually being suppressed, and it's being done by academia and different societies. I think of organizations like the Royal Society and the Nobel Committee, and these, they're basically the highest level of science, and they're setting the narratives of what we all are supposed to believe is the settled science and the truth about our reality. And I find more and more, the more you look into the different ideas that have been championed by them over the decades or centuries, the more it seems like narrative control. So how to bring about a new academia, I don't know. But I realized early on that if I was right about any of the stuff that I was discovering and I was starting to make videos about, that I had, zero chance of this getting through and creating some kind of a revolution in geology. Because for me to be right, that would have to mean that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of geologists around the world have missed very fundamental things about the nature of our physical reality and how stones actually form and how old they are and that sort of thing. So I don't perceive that happening anytime soon.
Well, I think it's happening. And I'll say this humbly. For years, people...
sorry, let me just finish the thought because I forgot to say it. So that was why I came out with the YouTube channel, just to share the findings, because I wanted as many people to get their eyes on this stuff as possible so that other people would wake up to this as a possibility. Now, I might be wrong, and I've said that from the very beginning. Don't take my word for it. Go out and look at this stuff for yourself, see if it makes any sense, compare it to anatomy, and decide for yourself whether I'm barking up the wrong tree or whether there might be some substance to the things that I've been claiming. And even claim is a strong word, because I don't, I still, with all this time and all the study and all the videos I've made, I still reserve a lot of doubt when it comes to my own findings. There are other things that we can get to later that I've got no doubt about. And I've started championing those on my channel, even though they don't necessarily relate directly to my own research.
Well, that's what I meant to say. People have written to me through the years and they tell me, do you realize that your platform is it's like a modern day mystery school. It's like a alternative academia, because I am a true believer in fostering intellectual pluralism. I hate when I'm told, nope, you cannot go there. I mean, UNESCO, the Smithsonian, they're known for, nope, this stops right here. Our science, our version of science says this or that. But what you talk about, I think those are marginalized or underrepresented topics, and we need a platform where you can come out with this information and, offer different perspectives. And I think that's one thing that academia lacks right now. And people they have a curiosity, they have a hunger for knowledge that's not available in mainstream.
Definitely. Yeah. And people mock YouTube. Oh, you got your education on YouTube. Oh, you watched some videos. But I mean, there's so much incredible information on YouTube, and there's a lot of very, very intelligent people who are chunking huge amounts of information. In my last live stream, I did it on the subject of opals, geodes, and how this relates to the topic of the great trees, which I'm extremely taken by. And you know, I'm referring to all kinds of very, very solid science and actual empirical experiments that are being done before your very eyes, you know. So I've been looking at this stuff a great deal. So I chunk a huge amount of information. Someone else comes along and they learn all that in the space of 2 hours. So to mock YouTube because, you know, it's unscientific, I think that, you know, if it depends on what your interests are. There's a lot of junk on YouTube as well. You have to be discerning, and you have to, you know, reserve doubt when it comes to new information and try and look for information that might contradict it as well, if you're going to be intellectually honest anyway.
Let's talk about the giant trees, because this obviously fascinates me. When I research these massive apparent stumps, the question that comes to mind, two questions. Number one, how tall were they? Because I wish I knew what the size of the roots are. How tall would they have been? What kind of environment did they exist on? And what got them? What kind of tool, machinery, laser, whatever, fill in the blanks. Why were they cut?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, the great tree theory, a lot of people who've been exposed to this, and there's some videos out there that have been seen by, you know, 500,000 people. They're focusing primarily on what appear to be tree stumps, you know, like Devil's Tower being the most famous of them. But there's a lot of different plateaus that appear, when you look at them, you know, from the perspective of tree, it looks exactly like a tree stump that's been cut down, and it looks like it was cut by a giant laser or something. So those are found all over the world, and sometimes they're perfectly circular, and sometimes they're shaped more like, you know, the random curves of, take an oak tree or something like that at the base. And those particular subjects open up a can of worms, and a lot of people end up arguing because it's like, oh, basalt, that's cooling lava. That's the official mainstream story about how these hexagonal columns can jet straight up into the air and you know, cool in a fashion that looks exactly like a tree stump. And yet when you look around lava flows all over the world and you see lava actually flowing and you see it actually cooling, you don't see anything that looks anything like that. In fact, you never see any straight lines whatsoever. So I have a hard time imagining that basalt columns are from volcanic activity. And I've seen no evidence of it. There are no videos of such a thing actually occurring. So you just have to take their word for it. And then when you take their word for it, they're making their claims based on things like their different dating techniques and spectroscopy, for example. They look at the different elemental constitution of the stone structures, and then they make claims about them. So once again, you have to just take their word for it when it comes to their, you know, extremely expensive instrumentation and their degrees and their claims, but you can't actually witness things occurring. Whereas there are examples, for example, in the geological record that have to do with things like, sedimentary layering. We're told that this happens over long, long periods of time. And oftentimes they're giving periods of millions of years. Whereas with something like Mount St. Helens, there's geological evidence where they're showing that these pyroclastic flows laid down large amounts of sedimentary layering in a matter of hours with micro layering. There's geologists doing boots on the ground footage there and showing this whole section, this came in a matter of hours. So a lot of our narratives when it comes to how things form, I think are really up for grabs, and a lot of claims are made that aren't necessarily substantiated by actual evidence. They're just accepted doctrine.
Let's speculate for a moment. What do you think was used in order to cut these, let's say, trees?
It's fun that you asked that question, because I've got a video of locked and loaded ready to go. Because I mean, if you go to the Bible, it might be something like what's called the glittering sword of God. You know, if you're a Bible believer, that things could petrify very rapidly and perhaps even be cut down. If you go to, say, the Greek myths, you got Medusa and this whole idea of something just rapidly turning to stone. But as far as how they would be cut down if those were trees, you got the Paul Bunyan myths of North America, which is what? That's a titanic man, you know, that's going and chopping these things down. Well, these stumps are not showing signs of axes, so that doesn't seem very reasonable. But when you get into a lot of the history, going back to this gets into the work of my friend Ben from The Archivist, also known as Waking Up with Analog. He's been scouring the newspaper archives, the digital archives for newspapers. We're going back to the very turn of the century, like the early 1900s, the late 1800s. When and he's been doing this for the last 7 years and has accumulated tens of thousands of clippings from these articles. And he's been sharing them by category on Twitter for quite a while now, and has only about 5 months ago started a channel of his own that's become very, very popular very quickly. And his work is absolutely fantastic because the stuff that he's finding paints a completely different picture of our history and our reality going back just 100 years from what we've been taught and told. Now, if you go to, you know, the history books and look at, you know, the sorts of things that we're growing up learning in school in our history books now, a lot of this is coming straight out of families like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the Carnegies, and that these are the barons, the tycoons that basically took over education. They took over the healthcare industry. They took over our textbooks. They took over the newspapers. And all of a sudden, all of these narratives that you're seeing across the board in the works of the archivist, they just start disappearing, and that starts to become mythology, and it starts to be fairy tale. Whereas in these articles, there's a ring of truth to them all because they're incredibly well written at a high level with the use of language and eyewitness accounts, and it doesn't sound like something from a National Enquirer. It sounds like something that people were very seriously investigating these very bizarre phenomenon that had to do with gigantism, had to do with ancient buried civilizations all over North America in particular. That's what his channel has really been focusing on, is the obscured and hidden past of North America that is so fantastic if you dig into it. And none of us, grew up knowing anything about this. And so, getting back to the trees and who cut them down, if you understand that across the realm, worldwide, there was a very advanced civilization. Now you can debate about whether or not that civilization had technology that we would consider magic by today's standards, anti-gravity devices, harnessing energy from the ether, if the ether exists, which I very much believe it does. We talked about the buildings pulling energy straight out of the ground or out of the ether. Those are theories that start to have a lot more credibility when you see what I consider to be a preponderance of evidence across the world of pyramids everywhere, of star forts everywhere, of evidence of cataclysm everywhere. And every time you look into this stuff, the further down you go, the more impressive and the more monumental the architecture seems to be, and the more accurate and the more precise, the more magnificent, the more beautiful. And we definitely seem to have degraded as we've gone forward in time. Like all we can build now are these steel frame skyscrapers. But getting back to the trees, I think it's not out of the realm of possibility that they had technology back then that we would consider like a steampunk technology that could easily have cut these trees down. And if you look into what is it called? They're diamond rope saws. These are ropes that are made with diamond, embedded with diamond, and they can be incredibly long, and you can cut through the biggest stone you can possibly imagine by just having two motors, actually one motor with a pulley system. So you've got a loop of a rope that's got a diamond cutting surface and two pulley systems on either end of one of these giant trees. And you could very easily, given enough time and very simple technology that I can easily imagine them having hundreds of years ago, you could just cut straight through these trees and make it look like it was cut by a laser. So this is the thing. There's so many simple explanations for how some things have happened. Like when we look at megalithic architecture, for example, you look at places like Baalbek and the pyramids themselves and these incredibly gigantic things that were made out of stone. We're told that they were quarrying this stone, they were carving it, they were lifting it. People invoke, ancient alien narratives. They invoke anti-gravity devices, magic. Who knows? All these different ideas have been bouncing around for a long time. But it's only now that mainstream alternative history researchers are starting to look at things like geopolymers to explain what we're seeing when we look at the pyramids. Makes a lot more sense that they were grinding up stone, and that they had different mixtures, just like we mix concrete now. They had all kinds of recipes back in the day, going back to the Roman concrete, and even before. And there's a lot of research that's been done on this, showing that we could make any kind of stone synthetically, just like out of the materials that were at hand. So a lot of these architectural feats could easily have been created in what I consider to be a far more Occam's razor-friendly theory using geopolymers. And there's so much evidence for that.
Well, a lot of these old buildings are made with some kind of material that hardens with time. I mean, right now, let's speak on the United States. Most homes are built with wood, and the ones with cement, how long do they last? Maybe 100 years at the most. But these buildings, with time, they become harder. And what do? They demolish them to put a parking lot or what have you. And, or they have the Great Fire of San Francisco, the Great Fire of this and that. And you wonder.
Great Fire of everywhere.
Yeah, great fire everywhere. And the whole city burns down. And that doesn't strike me as truth.
And they never seem to explain how these massive stone buildings burned based on fires of wood burning. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's totally fascinating. You mentioned the buildings made out of wood, and also there's a channel called Wise Up he's looked a lot into different ways in which things can petrify. Like, for example, seawater mixed with volcanic ash seems to be enough already to embed the wood and turn it to stone. So a lot of these different Neolithic sites, the stone circles, the different things that look like giant boats, but they're made out of stone and they're just sitting there. You see the skeleton of the boat. Those may very well have actually been wood to begin with, but then when the great cataclysms and the flooding occurred, mixing with the ash and the salt, the high mineral salt content waters, that was already enough to turn these things to stone. So I think that a lot of what we see that's stone now may have once actually been wood. And if the great trees were a thing, then where did all the trees go? This gets into topics of mining, like why were the trees cut down? The biblical narrative, the Enoch narrative, is that the angels went to work at the trees to keep the ones who had corrupted the realm from climbing up to escape the floods. There may have been some truth to that. I don't know.
When I think of the Grand Canyon, it looks to me almost like a quarry, like a mining area. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, I'm of two minds when I see that. When you look at the Grand Canyon from above, it looks a lot like a Lichtenberg figure, which is basically electrical. So if you put electrodes on a wooden table on either side and you run a lot of current through it, you're going to get this fractal burn pattern that looks identical to a lot of the river structures that we see and to the Grand Canyon. The only story when it comes to the Grand Canyon that doesn't make sense to me is the official one that was carved out by a river. But it could also very well have been mined. And then if it was mined, the question is, what was it to begin with? And I think here we're getting back to the great trees, because to me, when it comes to all of these fantastical theories and my own included with regards to the Titan Mountain and petrified hearts and all of these things, petrified organs, petrified all sorts of things. The one that has the greatest, most compelling evidence in my mind is the trees, and not because of the tree stumps, but because of the other evidence that's come forth. So the tree stumps are an interesting thing, but you can argue till you're blue in the face with people who think they know a lot about geology or about mineralogy, and they're just not having it because there's no way. I mean, there's some who believe that like Devil's Tower looks a lot like a mushroom. I've got a video on my channel that's just like a 10-minute video that I mirrored from another channel where he's showing actual high speed growth of different kinds of mushrooms, and it's amazing. They look identical to Devil's Tower, the same hexagonal structure to the fibers, and they're flattened on the top. So if we had trees in the realm that were miles across, then Devil's Tower could well have been a mushroom of some sort. I'm not saying it was, but it's an interesting theory. And when you see the visuals on it, it's something to at least ponder and accept as a possibility. But there's a channel that I mentioned last time, and I mention it almost every time I do a video now, Hangman 1128. He's a gentleman who lives in Colorado, and he has done incredible boots on the ground research for the last, I think, 6 or 7 years, documenting the evidence for the great trees. And we're not talking about the plateaus here. We're talking about the remains of gigantic cedars that were miles and miles across. And it sounds like a fairy tale. It sounds like something straight out of the movie Avatar. And I think that's exactly what it was. I think we're fed the truth of our history as fairy tales in movies, and our true history is been obfuscated. But the evidence that he's shown, that the trees were creating everything. They were creating all the different kinds of minerals, metals, gemstones. All of this stuff was coming from the trees. And the work of my friend Ben, the archivist, he's showing these ancient articles where they're mining these gigantic trees. They're finding all kinds of petrified forests where the trees have turned to different kinds of metal, copper, silver, gold, in high percentages. And they were cutting all these things down. So now we have one little forest, I think it's in Arizona, that's left, but they were mining these trees, both small and large, for those materials. And it's fascinating because this ties right back into biogeology. Were these trees making the metals and the things like opals and gemstones, and were they making them when they were alive, or was there a transmutation of elements when some kind of a massive electrical storm like would have maybe hit the Grand Canyon, if that's how it was formed? Were the elements then transmuted into something, and then we get the petrified results of that? I'm of two minds. Part of me thinks that some of these old trees were glowing and giving off their own light, and were just a sight to behold that's straight out of fantasy. But it may have just been that they were normal wood, like what we see today in the sequoias, and then eventually, when the cataclysm hit, which I think is most likely plasma, and we'll get back to plasma in a second. But when the cataclysm hit, then it changed these structures into what they then became. And, we're fed other stories about geology and how things form and what they're mining and how that came about. And so we're paradigm blind. We're totally unable to see the mining for the trees.
Well, when I'm thinking of Devil's Tower, I'm thinking of what we see in a tree hive, this hexagonal or polygonal structure made in nature. And then you see them going up like that. And then at the top, it's just completely flat. As you said, if it may be a giant and cut it off, or a laser was used. And the question is, if we had these massive trees everywhere, imagine the atmosphere the way it was. And I truly believe that the pyramids around the world, not only in Egypt, but all over the place, and even in places like China where they're covered with grass and farmers are paid to keep them that way, because the Sinos, the Chinese, they don't want anybody to think that there was a different civilization in that part of the world making these pyramids. But I think they had some kind of metal, gold perhaps, as a capstone, and they connected the entire grid of the earth, and there was electricity and energy flowing everywhere until these parasites came along and disconnected us from that.
Absolutely. And started charging us for what was once free. Yeah, it's a tragic tale, and we definitely live in a corrupted realm. And in my opinion, there was definitely a fall from some kind of a more paradisical, existence. But it's interesting to ponder all these things. So I think that felling of the great trees, it could have come, through some kind of steampunk tech, diamond rope saws, magic. The stumps and the plateaus, there's countless of them around. And if you get on Google Earth and you spot one of these, there's a couple of videos. There's one that I mirrored from a channel called Mr. MBB333, I think. I mirrored it on my channel, and he's looking in Madagascar. If you just go in Madagascar, you can see that there's a whole bunch of these circular things that, we're taught that they're volcanic in nature. But when you zoom in on them and you tilt with Google Earth, you can come in from the side and you can see the basalt columns, and they look just like tree grain, just like Devil's Tower does. So I definitely lean more towards tree with Devil's Tower than something like a fungus. And I think size-wise, it doesn't make sense. But this is another one of those things that when you're paradigm blind, we're taught about gravity and how gravity works. And we're told, that there's this thing called I think it's called the square cube law, where something gets too big and it can't support its own weight, and so it collapses. And so that's why creatures can't become, beyond a certain size, because they couldn't support their own weight. Well, I don't think the official story of gravity makes any sense. It's that's a deep rabbit hole unto itself. But a realm like what you're talking about, where the trees were here producing huge amounts of oxygen, higher pressure. There's lots of examples of gigantism in the historical record. This is something else that Ben has gone into so thoroughly, showing that not only did giants exist, but there were giant fruits, there was giant corn. Everything was bigger back then. And ironically, that's how it seems, because the deeper down you go when it comes to archaeology and excavations, the bigger everything gets. And it should be the other way around. The further down we go, the more primitive it should become, because that's what we're taught, right? That things evolved, and now we're at the pinnacle of our technological, existence. But I think it's far from the truth.
Absolutely. You keep using the term steampunk, and it's exactly what I've been thinking, that we had technology in the past that surpasses anything we have today. I mean, I wrote an article recently about the Antikythera mechanism. I mean, why is it that why did it take so long for us to make something that doesn't even come close to that, but it took hundreds, if not thousands of years before we could do something like that? There's like a gap of information, of technology, of wisdom, of knowledge in the middle, that it's almost like a black hole, a Bermuda Triangle of knowledge that disappeared from our psyche.
Yeah. And so why would they make such an effort to hide that? Well, obviously you can control people if you can sequester the information for yourself. If you know when an eclipse is going to come and you have a device that helps you predict it to the day and the time, you can threaten people with blocking out the sun, and claim, I'm going to shut out the sun if you don't give me all your money, give me all your crops. And so, that's That's something that I read about in the history books, that people, used astrology for just that purpose. Yeah. And there's something else that I was thinking about with that, but I lost the thread.
That's okay. I'll bring you back to that. But you mentioned gemstones and opals. These are admired stones. Did you bring back your thought, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, no, maybe it'll come to me. But when it comes to the gemstones and opals, I wasn't aware until just about 3-4 weeks ago that you can grow opals. There are videos online. In my last live stream, I covered a video where they're actually growing opals. And what I also didn't know about opals is they come from trees. So when you find opals in their native state, right, you can have a synthetic opal that you grow in a lab, or you can have it in its native state. And where are they finding them? They're finding them in tree. It's literally petrified tree that is where opal comes from. And you have varying degrees of quality, and the higher the quality, the more it's worth. But as I dug into Hangman 1128's footage about the trees, that's so undeniable what he's shown. And I've got the last couple live streams that I've done, if someone wants just a taste of some of the best footage, because he's got hundreds of hours of footage on his channel. At the very beginning, I've clipped out some of my favorite screenshots from his videos, and I just put it to music, and you can just watch and take in the majesty. We're not talking about the stumps here. We're talking about what I consider to be self-evident, undeniable proof. Now, there are people out there that are denying it, and they're saying, no, just looks like rocks to me. And I think they've either got their head in the sand, or they're supporting an agenda, or they're just in denial. I mean, I could be wrong, but I don't think so. When I look at it, I'm seeing all of the majesty of any kind of a tree, and all of the detail, both from the micro to the macro. And when I say macro, we're talking, a tiny chunk that you could fit between your fingers of a tree by today's standards would have been 50 to 100 feet across when we're talking about the great trees. And that's exactly what he's showing all over. And the different kinds of sap and the different varieties of trees, they each had their own composition when it came to the materials, and they would each petrify in a different way. So this is one of the things that's so confusing. Everything is so complex, and you're going to have it petrifying in different stages of deterioration as well. And it might be already in the process of rotting, or infused with some kind of a fungal growth or something. And so that's going to lead to a different kind of petrification than just the normal tree. Things like geodes, things like fruit, things like seeds. If we have seeds of trees, I've had people that have sent me pictures of, they've got petrified acorns that were sitting in a jar outside their house, and then rainwater was falling into this jar, and in less than a year, these acorns turned to solid stone. We're told that's impossible. Petrification takes thousands, if not millions of years. So the idea that opals were coming from trees, that you can grow your own opals, that the trees were producing gold and silver, this is what the idea that I lost earlier. If getting back to the idea of mining the trees or mining the titans, why hide all this information from people? Well, you can control them. I brought up the eclipse example, but another great example is if the great trees existed and titans once existed, and that's what they're mining, because of the complexity of materials that you get inside of a body or inside of a tree, then you're going to have an edge on everyone else when it comes to finding those valuable materials, because you're going to know what to look for. This is either tree or this is titan, and we're looking for this particular material. Well, that's found in that part of the body, or that's found in that part of the tree. So I think that the reason this has all been hidden and fed to us as fairy tale is because there's a whole lot of money being made by people who are hiding this information.
I have no doubt about that. I mean, his story, the winners always rewrite history. The cultural editors that you mentioned, some of those names, the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Carnegies, and the rest of them. But just shifting gears a little bit here, something that's really, somebody told me this years ago. He said the Earth has its own heating mechanism, its own cooling mechanism. If it's too hot, then we have the hurricanes that come along and cool the planet. And if it's too cold, then the volcanoes come along. What do you think about that theory?
Yeah, I think we're definitely in an enclosed realm. And whether it's enclosed by some kind of an energetic field, I mentioned last time that I'm more of a, rather than thinking that of the earth as flat, I tend to believe that we're on something flat, but within, I believe we're in like a toroid shaped earth. Personally, it sounds crazy to people who aren't familiar with it, but everything
it's like a bagel.
Have this shape. Yeah, it's like a bagel. It has an hourglass in the center, and then there's a central singularity at the very center of it, which I would consider to be our North Pole, where our compasses point, and
like a speaker.
And that would explain why we're getting these aurora borealises, and so what they call the Van Allen radiation belts may just be the radiation belts of our little system that we're in. And maybe that's just one of an infinite number of other systems that are all, nestled next to each other in the form of a tissue of some great being, or maybe they're floating in some kind of space. I tend to believe space is water, not what they tell us, because, when you look up at the stars, they have a very different look when you look at them with the zooms. But yeah, so why did I bring up the toroid thing?
When you say a toroid, you like a speaker? You've seen a speaker that has the twitter in the middle, the base around it, and it has the magnet in the middle.
Yeah. So that's oscillating and going up and down. And then that also creates cymatic patterns as well. And this is how, everything functions. We talked about the heart last time, and the flow of blood through the heart follows the exact same pattern. So that's why I lean more towards that. And, I brought that up in relationship to another question you asked, and I've forgotten what it is.
No, I'll just ask you about the volcanoes. Have you stumbled?
Volcanoes. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any theories about the true nature of volcanoes that might challenge our current understanding?
Yeah, well, I have one friend who's been looking into them a lot, and has found scientific studies that appear to suggest that they might even be buried technology. So there's just throwing that out there as a possibility. When you look at the volcanic the lava tubes, I'm thinking tree. It looks a lot like root structures of trees when you see volcanic tubes. And for several years now, I've hypothesized that maybe when we're talking about volcanoes, what we're actually seeing are the trees that got hit by whatever happened. So I tend to lean towards some kind of a big plasma event. In my last video, I showed that there's a little clip in my last video where a man is taken a couple of different kinds of powder, and he's put them into a microwave in essentially a votive candle holder. It's a thick glass, and he's put a ceramic lid on that. And with just the right chemicals, in 10 seconds in a microwave, he's able to create rubies using plasma, because the microwave has a very powerful, what is it called? Like a magnetron or something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so this, in just a matter of 10 seconds, he's able to take these two powders that he's mixed together and turn them into rubies in 10 seconds, and good size rubies. And obviously on a larger scale, you would get, more and more of that. So what you're looking at there is a transmutation of elements in the blink of an eye. Well, a ruby is the second hardest on the hardness scale after diamond. So there's absolute evidence that rubies can form very quickly. The coal, for example, comes from tree. You can take wood and you can make coal in a short amount of time. There's an article that I covered in my last stream that has to do with instant petrification of tree. So they basically have taken wood and they petrified it in the space of, I think it was less than a week in a laboratory. So these are all things that are being done now in laboratories and in blinks of an eye geologically, right? We're talking a flash. So this all ties into these theories about instant petrification. Coal when it starts to melt will vitrify, and that vitrification turns it into obsidian. So coal and obsidian, I think, are just different states of the same carbon atoms, right? So it's fascinating because you can see I think I showed it in the video as well, where there's different areas where you have a volcano, you have the caldera, and when you look at the caldera from the sides, you can see that it almost looks like the growth rings of trees. So more and more, I'm of the mindset that a lot of volcanoes, maybe not all of them, but certain types of volcanoes were once trees. They got hit. They might have had elements that in the process of transmuting became something like uranium or plutonium. And so we get these highly volatile active elements. And so you get this smoldering thing that's deep, deep down in the ground. And every once in a while that bubbles up. And what would it bubble up through? Well, perhaps the ancient root structures of the great trees. So it's just a theory that I've been working on. But the more I look into it, the more evidence there is that's in support of that theory. So it's fascinating to dive into.
This is mind blowing because I'm thinking when you said magnetron, I thought of the sun. I mean, the magnetron converts electrical energy into high frequency electromagnetic waves. And what is the sun? In my opinion, the sun is electro and magnetic. So if these stones are developed or created in time, perhaps millions of years, and the sun is the one responsible for it, but a microwave is a miniature sun and it can transmute and create these things rapidly. What do you think?
Yeah, this gets into what, theories about the plasma apocalypse. Some call it the EMCO event, which is the
like a flash
magnetic changeover event, I think is what it stands for. And this gets back to our myths about Medusa and Cthulhu and, what was Medusa known for? Turning things to stone instantaneously. We can see the power of the sun with something called a Fresnel's lens. Have you ever heard of one of those?
No, I haven't.
It's basically the lens. If you take a giant large screen television and you take the front panel of the television off and you put it in a wood frame so that you've got something to hold it, you've got a giant magnifying glass. Well, not everyone, but most people, I think, have worked with a magnifying glass and maybe burned some paper or some wood using the light of the sun. Well, now imagine that just a few feet across. Maybe say 4 by 6.
Oh, I've seen them. They actually melt the stone.
It melts a stone in seconds. It starts to turn it to liquid and it vitrifies. And you can see that it's turned to something that looks exactly like obsidian. So, imagine if we do live under a firmament, because I talked about, an electromagnetic barrier that's keeping us in this enclosed realm. That gets back to the gigantism. I do tend to think in kind of circular.
But we'll hold it right there because we have to take a break, and this is a good cliffhanger. What you just said about the firmament, because I've seen the videos of that rocket, the rocket that goes all the way up, and there's no brakes in a rocket, and it doesn't blow up, but it stops.
Sloshes to a stop.
A screeching halt. And I wonder what that could be. And also you see these Elon Musk rockets supposedly going up there. And if you look at them, it looks like they're traversing the firmament and going into an area that looks like water. It's like you see a boat.
Yeah, it's like a wake of a boat. Yeah,
exactly. So let's talk about this.
The barrier. Yeah.
Let's talk about melted structures after paradigm blindness. The need for a new perspective. There's so much more to discuss with Mike Wilkerson when we come back. But how can people learn more about your work? And I know you're working in a book, right?
Yeah, and we talked about that last time. But I got so wrapped up in the studies and work and family that I just decided to put it on hold because I'm just not so interested in the whole marketing game. So it's something I'm going to get back to soon. That's a book on the topic of hacking and my experiences as a teen, as a hacker. But people who are interested in what I've been studying and doing and sharing can go to the YouTube channel. It's called Stellium 7, STELLIUM. I have a Telegram group and a chat group where people can share some of their finds. Because after seeing my videos, people tend to reach out to me because they've found stuff and they wonder what I think of it. I'm no expert, but I'll take a look at stuff and offer an opinion if I have one. But a lot of times it's just I don't know. It looks biological to me, because a lot of this stuff does. But yeah, that's where they can reach me. I think the liner notes on my videos has the Telegram group. It's also Stellium 7 is the Telegram channel.
Excellent. And when we come back, I want to ask you something else about AI. I know that this is not an area you discuss too much, but being a former hacker, I want to get your take on the advent of AI and what it's doing to the world. But much more to discuss with Mike Wilkerson when we come back. This is Mel Hostelrick, and you are listening to VERITAS. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you for listening to the first part of this important VERITAS interview. To listen to the rest and all of our exclusive material, proceed to the VERITAS Plus member section or join the VERITAS Plus family by subscribing. Click on the subscribe button at veritasradio.com. Don't forget to visit the VERITAS store for focused life force energy. Get a 15-day free trial of FLFE today with no credit card required. And if you want to get in touch with Mel, want to be a guest on this radio program, have a guest suggestion, or have feedback, just click on the contact button on our website at veritasradio.com. Now, proceed to the VERITAS Plus member section or subscribe to listen to the rest of the interview. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening to VERITAS. Because you don't want to believe, you want to know.